Hey, Nicotine. Um, I'm glad that you at least respect the fact that there are these meditative traditions, mostly from the East, that do actually employ an empirical, at least a radically empirical, in the sense that William James used the term, radical empirical approach to understanding human experience. Radical empiricism just means that instead of only paying attention to the sensory data, we pay attention to um, our introspective awareness. And in the West, we really don't respect introspection too much because we think it's just subjective and we can convince ourselves of anything. Um, but in the East, they've recognized that introspection can actually be trained. And so your average person, when they look inward, sure, they'll come out with any old um, any old thing. But when a community um, trains itself and passes along through various processes of peer review certain techniques, introspection can become a technique uh, capable of revealing some um, I hesitate to say objective because I think the whole subject object divide is a false metaphysical premise. But certainly it is valid knowledge that can be derived from these meditative experiences, as valid as any empirical evidence provided by Western science. Now, when it comes to metaphysics and spiritual experience, and um, certainly the spiritual experience that many people have, um, it must be explained by them in some sort of language. And if you are raised a Christian, you're going to explain it in Christian language, a Muslim in Muslim language, and so forth. Um, if you are a Westerner who was raised in the Judeo-Christian context, but then turned to, after a period of atheism, turned to the East and looked at Buddhism or Vedanta or Taoism or what have you, then you would interpret your mystical experience in a different way. Now, I think when we talk about materialism, often, and I'm not sure if you're implying this, but it seems that we often assume, some of us assume, that materialism is synonymous with science. Materialism is a metaphysical belief system. Science only tells us about the nature of phenomena, you know, the world as it appears to us, in other words. Science tells us um, what um, or how the phenomena which appear to us may work the way they do. We develop theories, we test them. None of the tests that we do confirm the theories, they just confirm that the theory is not wrong. But science continues to advance, paradigms shift, old theories are tossed out as new theories become explanatory of some deeper principle which we hadn't recognized in the prior paradigm. So materialism, I think, is um, it depends on what exactly you mean by materialism. I mean, certainly, um, I think that matter is real, but I also think that consciousness or perception plays an important role in how that matter appears. Because obviously, it appears. We know matter only because we perceive it. Um, you know, Bishop Berkeley once said that to be is to be perceived. And I think there's a lot to that. It's not the ultimate um, proposition, but I think we have to recognize that matter exists because we are aware of it. But certainly we must be material bodies in order to perceive it. Um, so, you've made one video about consciousness in the brain that I watched. You didn't really mention the hard problem of consciousness, which is how, if we suppose from the beginning that matter is just this dead and sentient stuff, how could it become conscious, or how is it related to this interior perspective that we have on the world. That, if you look at my brain, you won't be able to taste the things that I taste, feel the emotions that I feel, think the thoughts that I think. You'll see certain brain activity that we could suppose is correlated to it. I think it's reasonable to assume a correlation between brain activity, neural activity, and experience. But it's another step to say that the brain is causing that experience. There's a difference between correlation and causation. How do you deal with this problem, the hard problem of consciousness? How our first person perspective on the world is related to the third person physical brain? Because for me, the fact that this problem is so intractable, that it's so hard to get a grip on where to even begin trying to understand it, it opens the door to a certain type of metaphysics and a certain way of interpreting the nature of spiritual experience that contradicts the naive materialist position. There are many forms of materialism, again, and I'm not sure which exactly you hold, but I'd be curious to engage you further on this issue of, for one thing, the hard problem of consciousness, but also why it is that we assume that materialism and science are or should be equated with one another, when really science seems to be more about the phenomenal world rather than the world as it exists in itself. If you want to talk about the world as it exists in itself, you've got to do metaphysics. Science can inform us in our metaphysics, but it doesn't really give us everything that we need. We also need to look to our experience, whether it be our everyday waking experience or our non-ordinary experience, our spiritual or mystical experience. All of that is valid evidence when it comes to doing metaphysics. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. I really appreciate your perspective. I agree with you 90% of the time, I think. But let's see if we can go into the details here and drag out some interesting discussions. So thanks for listening. Take it easy.